to do a question and answer presentation about all things fiscal. Tanya is open to receiving questions throughout the presentation, so I'll be monitoring the chat for those questions, and we'll jump in periodically to read them out loud. So Tanya, welcome.
Hi everyone. Are we going to go to the slides?
Sherry, Tanya's asking if we're going to move forward with the slides.
Thank you, Sherry. Okay, I'm sorry. Elizabeth was supposed to be asking the questions for me, but I guess she's not going to be doing that piece.
Kirsten will be asking the questions for you. So just tell me next and I'll advance your slides.
Okay. All right. Let me, Sherry, you can go ahead and advance the slides, please.
Okay, our first topic has to do with getting reimbursement and submitting remittances. The first question is, how often can I submit a remittance?
Well, that's a good question. So remittances are submitted once per day. They can be batched. If you have multiple remittances that you normally would submit remittances throughout the period of a day, you would now batch those into one remittance for that day, and the same would apply thereafter.
Great, thank you. Is there a standard format for a remittance?
The remittance is set up already in CAMS based on the approved activities for the program. So based on the approved activities and what you submitted in your budget, those are the categories and how the remittance will be submitted, along with the necessary supporting documentation, if applicable.
Okay, and what supporting documentation do I need to attach to a remittance request?
That really depends on the program, but primarily you would have to support the items being requested on the remittance. So if that's time, then you would need to have timesheets in place, not necessarily uploaded with the remittance, but you would need to have those in place. Any type of invoices that support or substantiate the cost that you are requesting for, as well as the updated cover sheet, CAMS cover sheet remittance.
Great. And Elizabeth is pointing out that Tanya has updated the cover memo, and it will be uploaded into the website as a handout to this session.
Speaking of the updated CAMS cover sheet remittance, this is what it's going to look like. Nothing really has changed except for that I changed the presentation, changed it from portrait to landscape. And the information that you would normally submit on the remittance is the same. The date, the grantee name, project title, contract number, CAMS remittance number, the prepared by, payee name, and invoice number, description, the total invoice amount, applicable program portion, other amount, check numbers, credit card reference number, and total amounts, as well as the signature and date of the individual preparing this form and submitting the documentation.
And before we go to the next slide, Sarah asked, a remittance can be made by a consultant but needs to be reviewed by the grantee, and Elizabeth answered yes.
Yes, that's correct. Next slide, please.
Okay, Tanya, this is about getting reimbursement. The first question is, do I need to submit a special W-9 in order to get paid?
Yes, the Commonwealth of Virginia has a separate W-9. It's called the substitute W-9 form that all subrecipients, if you're new with doing business with the Commonwealth of Virginia, are required to submit in order to get paid through the state.
And we have a question in the chat. Does the updated cover sheet need to be used for current projects to be reflected immediately?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And with regard to the W-9, where do I get it?
If you're new to getting new to the state, then that's something that should be included in your application package. However, if your remittance has already gone through the system, once it comes to my queue for review, I will get a notification saying that you're not in the system. And in that case, the W-9 will come from your assigned specialist, and they will provide the form and ask you to complete it and return to that individual so they can forward it on to me.
Great, and where do I send it?
You will send that back to the assigned specialist who originally reached out to you asking for you to complete the form.
Great, thank you. And a couple questions in the chat. Marion asks, where can we find the updated cover sheet? Will you send it out? I believe we said that we would attach it to this presentation, upload and attach it to this presentation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then Sarah is asking, is that W-9 part of pre-contract activities?
I believe that it will be incorporated into the process going forward, and that is solely to prevent any delays or potential delays that will come up if we ask for it after you submit your remittance. There's a process that once we go through the approval flow in CAMS, and it gets to the stage where it's for my approval, which is the final approval in the process, and I need to get a W-9 that's going to hold up you guys receiving the payments in a timely manner. So hopefully going forward, that will be something that's included in the during that phase, so to prevent any delays in payments.
Great, thank you. And Tanya, Amanda is asking, she said, you noted that we want only one remittance per project per day. Can you tell us why we're asking our partners to do things this way?
Yes. So a personal experience, I had a one day approved 52 remittances for one subrecipient for the same day. That is extremely time consuming for everyone involved in the process, including the person who actually had to go through and do all of those. So for me, it made more sense to batch them instead of submitting them individually, and then consuming so much of everyone's time that has to be involved in that process.
It's a lot of remittances. You ready for the next slide?
I think Joanne came through with a question.
Oh, she sure did. Sorry about that. That special W-9 is for new grantees only, correct? If the grantee is already in the system and receiving payments, it's not needed, correct?
I would like to say yes, but I have had a situation where in the organizations were in the system, and we still needed to get an updated W-9 for them. So potentially that's what it's supposed to be for. But I have had a situation where that has occurred for individuals who have previously done business with the state.
Thanks for that clarification. With regard to payment processing, the first question is, how long does it take to process the payment and for us to receive payment?
So by law of the Prompt Payment Act, we have 30 days to get that payment released to everyone. And depending upon if you're set up with EFT, which is electronic funds transfer, that would interfere or cause a delay in you guys actually receiving the payment quicker. Because if you're not signed up for EFT, then you're more than likely going to receive a check. And that's going to further delay, because we know how much problems individuals have been having with receiving mail. So we have at least 30 days in order to get those payments out to you.
And Tanya, just following up with the W-9, Amanda is asking, the W-9 has to be in the CAMS system prior to the receipt of remittances?
So yes, it would be good if once you guys go through the application process, and once all of that transitions over to a project, that information is there. You let myself or my team member assigned to that program know where the W-9 is, so that we'll know in advance if they're new, where to look to then retrieve it and send it on for further processing.
Okay, and what do you mean by at least 30 days to process remittances?
So once you submit your remittance and it goes through your process, the approval process, we have 30 days to pay it. So from the time that you submit your remittance in CAMS, we have 30 days from that date to process your payment.
Okay, thank you. And can I get paid by EFT, which is electronic funds transfer, directly to my bank?
Yes, if you have set your organization up with DOA, which is the Virginia Department of Accounts, for that, then yes, you can get processed through electronic funds transfer. And Amanda, I'm sorry, I saw your hand.
So the way you described it, I just wanted to do my Captain Obvious thing and say that my understanding is that it's 30 days from the time we approve it, which means that if we have questions or if the submission lacks full documentation and we have to come back to the grantee, that 30-day clock does not start ticking until we've all signed off on it. Is that accurate?
So the 30 days starts when the subrecipient submits the remittance. However, if by chance we have an issue with the documentation submitted and have to go back to the subrecipient for clarification or additional information, that's going to add those days back to the 30-day period. So it's what I would suggest is to make sure that when you're submitting the remittance, that you're clear on what's going to be required for the activities and what's going to be required for you in regards to submitting the documentation, and that should prevent you from having any delays or follow-up questions from the specialist and or the program manager.
Thank you for that clarification.
Problem.
Tanya, is there anything else I should know about getting payments?
Well, I would say if you're interested in setting up your organization, if you're not, if you don't know how to get to set you guys up for electronic funds transfer, please reach out to your specialist and let them know that's something that your organization is interested in, and then we can get that paperwork to you. Also, another thing that will be beneficial is when you're setting these accounts up for electronic funds transfer, that you're confirming the bank account that you want the money to be deposited in is the correct one. Once you set up the bank account, however it was originally set up, all the payments are going to be going to that account. And unfortunately, we at DHCD have no control over that information. So you would have to reach out to Department of Accounts and change that information. For example, if the account has closed and you're new to the organization and your payments are going to a closed bank account, there's no way that DHCD would be able to know that. That's something that you guys will have to handle on your end. And so the payments would be going to a closed account, which means you wouldn't get it through electronic funds transfer, and more than likely you'll be issued a check. So it's very important that you're stand on top of the banking information provided to DOA when you're setting up these accounts for electronic funds transfer. Oh, Elizabeth, you have your hand raised. What's your question?
It's not really a question. It's just a piece of information for our grantees and subrecipients. It's my understanding that DOA will let you set up multiple bank accounts. So, for example, if you've got an IPR contract, a CDBG contract, and a home contract from our housing folks, you can set it up in DOA. So you have 3 different accounts, and then you just tell them when you set up the project in CAMS, I want the IPR funds to go to this account. I want the CDBG funds to go to that account. I know I have some grantees. I think they must have like a dozen accounts that they can choose from for multiple projects. So if you want to, slice and dice it that way, you can, as opposed to having all your funds deposited in one account and then you have to move funds to where you want them to go.
So that's a good point. But again, that will require the organization to inform Department of Accounts, this is how we want this particular account set up, and these are the dollars that we're going to be attaching to it. So you would do that with DOA, and then in CAMS, you would have to specify that same information so that you can ensure the money for the various programs that DHCD offers is being deposited to the correct account per your accounting system.
And Tanya, who should I contact if the payment is not received within the specified time frame?
You should most definitely reach out to your program specialist and inform them of that information.
Elizabeth?
So I was just going to say that if you contact me on day 10, and we've got 30 days to approve it, I'm simply going to tell you that, we still have 20 days to work on this. So wait until, you're closer or after the 30-day limit before you contact us, because, there are multiple people who have to look at this, and, they have different training schedules and vacation schedules. So be patient. We'll try to get our funds to you as quickly as we can. And I know Tanya is very sensitive on people who use advance funds. She knows that they can't pay their contractors until they get the funds. So we try to work around that. Thank you.
Should we move forward?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And this page looks like resources for setting up remittance payments.
Kristen,
Yes.
I see that it's 10:59.
Yes.
Do you want to hold off on continuing?
Do we have our guest? Not yet.
Why don't we go ahead until our guest arrives?
Yeah, I do not see him in the sign on yet.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to speak about this slide, Tanya, about the resources?
I actually spoke about that previously. So
Okay, great.
These are the links for the substitute W-9, as well as if you're interested in setting up your agency for the electronic funds transfer.
Okay, talking about audit requirements, how often do they need to be submitted?
They should be submitted every year, depending on your organizational expenses. DHCD has a audit policy which addresses each organizational expense by a dollar amount. So depending on where your organization falls within those thresholds, it dictates what type of financial reports you will be required to submit to DHCD annually.
And can you give us an overview of the DHCD audit requirements?
Everyone, well, I hope everyone on the call knows that if you expend more than $750,000 in federal funds, then you're required to get an A133 audit. So that's the last threshold. And then anything earlier than less than 750,000 has the various expenditure thresholds. So if you, I don't have it in front of me, but I do know that it goes from the financial statements being prepared by an organizational staff member to the financial statements being prepared by a CPA.
Great, thank you. And Kathy is also mentioning that the deadline for submitting the audits and CAMs is usually March 30th or 31st of each year.
That's not necessarily true. It's really dependent upon that organization's reporting period. So some organizations in their reporting period on our like ours ends on a fiscal year. Some in theirs on a federal fiscal year, which is September 30th of whatever year, and then some submit theirs. Some others expire on a calendar year, which is December 31st. So it really depends on their reporting period.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Kathy said that the deadlines for her grantees have been those dates, so she appreciates the clarification. Which financial reports need to be submitted annually if my organization receives a grant of less than $100,000?
So that would be your income statement, balance sheet, and statement of cash flows.
Great. And what would you say are the most common mistakes found in the audits or the financial reports that would cause them to get rejected?
The biggest one that I've seen is organizations' failure to submit the statement of cash flows. Next slide, unless we have any questions.
There's nothing in the chat. Elizabeth does say that 100,000 reflects the total amount of federal funds the grantee receives.
Right. If they haven't expended, it should include all funding. The federal funds really come into play when they expend 750,000 or more in federal dollars.
Do we have any other questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. You're also welcome to come off mute and ask the question directly. If there are questions that you have outside of this presentation after we conclude, please forward those to Elizabeth, and her email is on this slide. She will make sure that she gets your question to the appropriate person for an answer, but send everything directly to Elizabeth if you have questions after this presentation is done. Oh, Kelly, EB, is that amount that the grantee receives in a fiscal year or expends? Is it the amount that they've received or the amount that they have expended?
The amount they receive in whatever their fiscal year is. Like Tanya said, that could be like the state fiscal year, July 1 to June 30th, or it could be the calendar year, but it's the amount of money you receive.
So as it relates to the A133 audit, it is based on the amount expended.
Thank you for that clarification.
So let's unpack that a little bit. Okay. So Acme County only has, just for the sake of the conversation, has only one source of federal funds, and they've got a contract with that federal entity for $2 million, but in a given year, they expend only $500,000. They expend only $500,000. So Tanya, that means, I believe, that they do not have to do the A133 audit, but they are still going to have to be accountable for that expenditure through one of those other tiers.
That's correct. If they're only receiving one federal award, and they expend $500,000 in a calendar year, fiscal year, federal fiscal year, then they are not required to get an A133 audit. However, they are required to submit some type of financial statements based on where they land within that tier.
Okay, so let's shift it up a little bit. Now they have two sources of federal funds, and each of those sources is less than $750,000, but together they exceed $750,000 on what they have expensed in their annual fiscal cycle. So now, because together they have expended more than $750,000 of those two sources, that pushes them into that A133 audit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If a portion of that is CDBG, can they use the CDBG funding to help pay for the cost of the audit?
That would be considered an eligible administrative cost, and they could apply whatever portion is applicable for the CDBG funds. The CDBG program should not assume the entire portion of that cost if there are other programs that are involved in the monitoring process or the audit process.
So Acme County, because it's a small county, and Possumville is the county seat. They have expended $1 million over the course of their fiscal cycle. 100,000 of that was CDBG expensed funding. So that's 10% of what they've expended. And so whatever the portion of the cost of the audit is, that equals 10% would be the CDBG eligible expenditure for the audit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And Tanya, just to clarify, the A133 audit is also known as the single audit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, Sherry, should I turn it back over to you? That was a great presentation, Tanya. Thank you so much for all that information.
Thank you. Have a good day.